hello, and thanks for coming back to view another video of our incoherent ramblings about our faith transition.
Pretty sure I was scratching my eye when that started, so if that's the case, I'm sorry.
It is what it is.
It is what
we
it
said
is.
One shot, no cuts. So whatever ends up in the video is what ends up in the video, because we're trying to be more genuine in our content.
So here we are.
Here we are.
Take us for what we're worth.
Yeah. So we kind of wanted to play a little more off of the first video that we made, kind of describing how the cracks formed for what really did us in on leaving the church. So yeah, where should we start with? Okay.
Where should we start?
There is a lot of it is a process. So even though we had those cracks formed, I would say even this time last year, like I would not have thought, like even when I was disenfranchised with the church, working for the church, I would not have even thought of leaving the church because it was such a big tenet in my life. I would have needed, at that point, still very damning evidence for me to like up and leave. I don't know. How did you feel about it?
Yeah, I feel like we were 1 foot out the door. Like we were still trying to make it work because there's this like crazy perception amongst members sometimes that if you choose to leave the church, you're taking like the easy way out, and you're just like, it's easier to just leave the church. Like it's the easier way than it is to stay. And so we really, like when you go through a faith crisis, if you will, like we did, I feel like we really did everything in our power to try to stay. We looked at leaving truly as like a last option.
Yeah.
Like leaving was never even on the table at the beginning of this process.
No, and when we were really like confronted with the possibility, it was more of a, let's see what we find, and if not, then we'll stay. And that was really more when we were thinking about blessing our son. He was only a couple months old at the time, like 1 or 2. This is probably back like in October. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of strange. But I mean, we didn't arrive at that point overnight. There was a lot of things that kind of rubbed us wrong. And don't get me wrong, we have not had it that hard. Like, we're both white and heterosexual, so a lot of the really unsavory things about church policies and things like that didn't really apply to us. So, like, we said we were allies, but I mean, really, it was something that we could overlook for a really good long time, I think.
I think there's a lot of dissonance, cognitive dissonance that goes on when you're in the church and you're trying to, and you're like disagreeing with what the church is doing, like policy-wise or politically, because you want, like this perception is if you stay, you're trying to like shape the church from the inside out. You're trying to change it from the inside, and you're trying to make steps progressively towards becoming better. But the reality of it is you're up against $1 billion entity, and change like that just doesn't come by the voice of the small minority in the church. And so we thought for a long time that we were contributing to that change, and that we still, like, we accepted the LGBTQ plus community and we supported them, and we disagreed with pretty much everything the church did in regards to how they treated them, and we disagreed with all those things, yet we still were a part of this organization that was discriminating against and harming these people.
Yeah, and I mean, it hurts to say, but honestly, the word performative comes to mind, which is really kind of disappointing, and I don't want to paint with a broad brush, but being a nuanced Mormon, for me, now looking back at it, was performative at best.
Yeah.
So for like all the things that we truly believed in, and we were being part of an organization that was enabling hatred against any sort of group, which should never happen in any sort of religion, if you want to call it that. It just was so super two-faced, and like she was saying, like it's just this load of cognitive dissonance that eventually you just get tired of, and you either got to let go of one side or you got to let go of the other. So
and that's one aspect of it. I mean, this, like, the problem with a faith crisis and why it's so frustrating to me when people say leaving is the easy way out is because this is one facet of this journey and decision for us. When it's stacked. This thing is layered. It's like this really extensive decision-making process. And all the while you're in this decision-making process, the consequences of these decisions based on what the Mormon Church teaches you are very grave,
dire.
And so, I mean, part of your salvation is in question. Part of whether or not you're going to spend eternity with your family, if you're going to be able to see your family members again, if you're going to be able to be with God in Christ again. Those are all things that kind of come into question when you decide to leave the church. And so these choices aren't made flippantly at all. And so, but it's also frustrating when people come and ask us, they're like, why did you leave? And we're like, it is a good question, because I'm curious about those things too. And I see popular Instagram people or socially well-known Mormons that leave. I'm like, why'd they leave? But it's like, there's so many answers. Like people often ask us on our live stream, and we've given a range, but I mean, so many things. Church history was a huge weight for us. And I've carried the weight of my struggles with church history regarding polygamy for a long, long time. And eventually I forced myself to dive in and read it and look into it with an unbiased perspective and just look at it for what it was. And it was heartbreaking. And so, and that's, again, one facet of church history that's problematic. And so when you dive into these issues, you don't dive just into one thing. Like, you dive into polygamy and then you dive into like 5 more within polygamy. Or you dive into Joseph Smith and you dive into 100 more just within Joseph Smith. Yeah.
I think it can be used against you, but at like the same breath, like, I still had a testimony of the Book of Mormon up until a month or 2 ago, because I had good experiences with it. And that's what the church teaches you, is that if you have a good experience with the Book of Mormon, that's the testimony that it's true. But, there's a lot of good things that are in it. I'm not going to deny that, some of the teachings are a good way to live your life. Like,
sure,
a lot of books have those same things to offer. Yeah. So it's not necessarily unique to the Book of Mormon. And then when you deconstruct the origin of the Book of Mormon, that's when it kind of started it had no more grip over me of going, well, what about this and these experiences you had and all these things that, you told people with firm belief that this book was true and this, that, and the other, and in a different language, no less. So I think a lot of, as we were going through this process, we were undoing some of the grip that a lot of these things had over us that were holding us back. Like, we have all our lives to be with our families, and learning about the temple ceremony and just how it was blatantly ripped off of stuff and how it has no basis.
There's just so much to it. There's so much to it, especially when you dive into church history and you start looking at Joseph Smith and Brigham Young, and you start looking at the witnesses of the Book of Mormon and the Book of Abraham, and all of these things start to kind of compound, and then you have to set that aside and kind of deconstruct your own personal experience and decide, okay, well, I've had these positive personal experiences within the church, and I've had these positive personal experiences within the temple, And, you know, I felt like they were spiritual experiences, and I felt connected with my ancestors. And people are like, well, how do you rectify that? And it took me a minute, but I realized once we left the church that those experiences and those feelings that I was having in the temple and those things are still happening now. Like, they're still happening to me. They are as present as ever, if not more.
Mm-hmm.
And so those experiences and those things aren't singular or owned by the church. Like, those things aren't unique to the church. You don't have to be a part of a Mormon church in order to have those experiences. And I would say that of any organized religion. Those experiences are you. That's spiritual and a experience unique to you. And the church can't take that away from you.
Yeah, and I think it's part of the draw for a lot of people because they assign some sort of explanation to something that you don't necessarily know the explanation to. And I mean, that's how I felt for the longest time. I was like, but I had these experiences and I, you know, felt the spirit or however you want to describe it. And then I realized, oh, well, maybe that's not exactly what I thought it was. And maybe it's not limited to what I've known my entire life, because it was easy for me to explain it that way because that's all I'd ever known. So that's another part of the whole deconstructing and leaving the church, is that, I mean, it's the only thing I had ever constructed. So like, leaving it was such a painful experience because I'm leaving everything that I knew to go and build up something else that I'd never known before.
I mean, it's woven through your identity. Like, this is, with both of us being born and raised in the church, we don't, like, the basis for everything that we had with family, morals, you know, anything really is all structured within the church, like getting baptized when you're 8 and getting the priesthood and going to the temple and doing baptisms for the dead, and all these experiences that we had as young adults and that we had as children are all intermingled with the church. And so deconstructing is a really hard process because you feel like everything is falling down around you, and the answers that you thought you had, you really don't. And I understand that there's major comfort in having answers to what happens after this life. I would much rather stay in the church and just believe what those things are than come out of it and have to face what's coming next.
Yeah. Because 95% of everything has some sort of an explanation.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's only very few, like a small facet of questions where they would be like, oh, well, the Lord will sort it out in the end, and you don't really ever get an answer. But like most everything, like, we know who God is, we know his nature, we know where we came from, we know where we're going.
We know where we go, we know what kingdom we're probably going to be assigned to potentially.
Down to the chair we're going to sit in, basically. Yep.
And so that's really, like, to the person that's not comfortable with ambiguity, which is most people, having those answers is really, it's solid. Like, it makes you feel at ease knowing that that's, like, you don't have to worry about it. Like, prior to leaving the church, I had never considered that there was any possibility that something else would happen after this life. like I had never considered that there would be anything else. Like, I have just always thought that's what it would be, because we have prescribed answers for pretty much everything. And so that's what I thought would happen.
Yeah. And even when I was a teenager, like, and I didn't want to be part of the church anymore, I never even considered anything else. Like, no. I still thought the plan of salvation was how things were going to play out. I didn't really ever investigate anything else, even though I was like, oh yeah, I'm done with the church.
Well, it's such a process from here going forward, because it's such a balance, because people are like, oh my gosh, you guys left the church, but you can't leave the church alone, and all these stupid comments. And I'm like, this was such a huge part of our lives. We're still deconstructing. So if you're here and you're on this journey with us, you're truly on this journey with us, because we're still in it. Yeah. Like, we're still freshly leaving. We're still finding out things that we were never taught. Yeah. We're still discovering things that we didn't know are out there. We're still doing all of those things. Yeah. So this is still very present for us, and we deserve those answers. Yeah. Because we never got taught those things.
Yeah. It's like a thirst I mean, when people discover the church, they want to know all these things about it, and they want to read the Book of Mormon or whatever when they feel like that's the right thing for them. And then now we're leaving the church, and we want to know all the things that were left out.
Mm-hmm.
We're like, well, how deep does this go? It's not really, well, I need to prove myself right. It's more of a, well, I'm totally convinced now. I just need to know.
Was this based in truth or not? Where
Yeah.
did this come from? How did we even arrive at this point if this was something completely different?
Yeah.
Like, these are things we've believed our whole lives. And so having the opportunity to actually, like, sit with the truth, as uncomfortable as it is really kind of cathartic, because we're getting answers, even though
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't the answers that we wanted.
Yeah. So we're up to 15 minutes now.
Holy
so
crap.
we're gonna wrap it up real quick. But basically, what we have learned is that it's okay to not know something, because the church teaches you that, like, if you want to know something, you can go and find it, but sometimes you can't find those answers. And there's nothing wrong with that. There shouldn't be anything wrong with that.
As humans, we want to put everything in black and white. We want everything to be yes, no, solid answer, solid non-answer. Like, we want everything to make sense and to be in boxes and compartmentalized and organized and pretty, but that's just not how it works. That's just not how life is. And so we have to be okay with ambiguity and just being in gray area for now.
Yeah, so I think we'll link some of our resources that we found helpful down in the description. If you are curious about them, if you are a current active Mormon and you're having some questions, you can find us on TikTok. We do a lot of more kind of goofy stuff on TikTok. But yeah,
we're also on Instagram, even though it's kind of sad looking right now.
It's kind of sad looking. That's okay. But it's okay to have all these doubts. They say to doubt your doubts, but
if you're having them, you're not alone, and there's
You're
nothing
not
wrong
alone.
with you for thinking that way. So if you want to come back, come hang out with us in the gray area.
hang out in the gray area. We go live every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday.
8:30 Mountain Daylight Time on TikTok.
Mountain Daylight Time, unless we're sick.
Yeah.
This Friday. But anyway, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.